In this tutorial, what we're looking at is creating artificial eye makeup using Photoshop tools. This is actually pretty straightforward to do. I'll show you an example of what you can get. I'll just turn on this layer called Completed. It's a group of different layers, and that's got everything. It's got brow colouring, shadows, eyelid colouring, even artificial eyelashes. Now in this shoot we're not going to be looking at the eyelashes. They deserve their own tutorial, so we'll do those later. But we will look at the basic colouring technique that we use for this. So I'll just turn off that and we'll create a new layer. This layer is going to deal with the eyelid. So I'll rename the layer, call it eyelid. And we need to change the blending mode for this layer. Change from normal to colour. There's a few blending modes you can use for this, but colour's the most dependable to start off with. Let's now choose a colour that we want. Take your colour picker. I'm going to choose a colour that's kind of sympathetic with the eye actually, so I'll just pull the eyedropper out here and I'll just choose a colour shade straight off the eye itself and say OK. And we're ready to go. I'll just check that my brush size is okay. Yeah, brush size is pretty good, but you want to try and adjust that to make sure it fits in with that eyelid, and just start painting. Now I'm going to be making a few little errors as I do this one, not because I mean to, but because I'm nowhere near good enough at painting. I always make mistakes, but the errors won't really matter too much. We're going to clean those up with a bit of blurring and erasing and layer masking. So there's the basic colour. It matches pretty well, but if you really want to control the colour to a very fine degree, and after you've painted, try this. Go to Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. With this turned on, you can now adjust the actual hue to practically anything that you can imagine. So you can fine control that. Mix this in with lightness. If you carefully reduce the lightness or increase the lightness, you can increase or decrease the effect of the colour. Then mix that in with the saturation, and you can really fiddle around with those colours and how much of an effect you're going to get, so you can get the exact shade you're after. Now I'll just push this down a little bit. I'm going to go for a basic bluey tinge with not too much saturation. Like so. I'm happy with that. I can live with that, I think. That looks pretty good. Okay, now once we've got it, we need to clean this up a little bit, and the easiest thing that we need to do here is to just blur the edges of this a little bit. So I'm going to go to the filter menu, blur and Gaussian blur. Now you don't need to go in too much. You're looking at blurring the edges of this so it just softens up a little bit, like so, and that blends pretty nicely. We'll say OK. Okay, now if there's anything in here that doesn't look good, add yourself in a layer mask. Now with a layer mask and your brush, just check your brush edges so that the hardness is as soft as possible. Go for a reasonably large size. You want to get this as next to this so it looks pretty darn big. Yep, that looks pretty good. And we'll just go on to our mask and we'll just gently blend in those edges. Just do the same there. That blends in nicely. Okay, done. Next thing is we want to put in some colour up here. So this is the brow colour. Once again, we need a new layer. Now in this layer, I'll just name it brow colour. And we need a different colour. I'm going to go for a fairly bluey purple sort of tone, so I'll take my colour picker once again, push this up into the purples. That'll do, something nice and lurid. And I just need to adjust my brush size down a little bit, and I'll just paint in. I'm only using normal mode here at the moment. Just go down a bit smaller again, like so. Yep, that's pretty good. And we change the blending mode, this time to soft light. The soft light mode is quite useful for this sort of work. It gives us a underlying luminosity value as well as retaining most of the shade information, but you're quite welcome to try the original colour mode if you want to fool around with the colour mode. Either one of them will work quite well depending on the effect you're going for. But I'm going to push this to soft light. I've got a pretty good idea where I'm going with this. Okay, now we need to soften the edges again, and again we need to blur it. So it's filter blur, Gaussian blur, and this time you're going to go nuts. Really push this up because good eyebrow colouring blends. It's got to blend in all the way. If you go all the way over the top, it'll disappear completely. But just keep your eye on it and bring it down so that it blends without being ridiculous. I'll say okay. Alright, now if that colour is too much, and personally I think it is a bit too much, go to the opacity of the layer, pull it all the way down to 0, then just dial in the exact amount of opacity you need to get the shade colour that you want for the brow. I'm happy with about 60% on this one. Okay, so that looks pretty good too. Let's enter, and we'll look at the next extra that we'd like to add in here, which is a little bit of colour, an eyeliner under the lower eyelid. Now we need to shrink our brush down again, and this time I'm going quite small. We need to choose a basic black for this. It needs its own layer, of course, which I'll call liner. Liner. Okay. Take your brush and reasonably carefully go along the edge. Like so. Doesn't look very nice, but here's where we clean it up again. Our good friend the blur tool, take Gaussian blur once again for a spin, and we'll just drag it down, drag it down, drag it down. Yep, that will do for me. That looks pretty much on the money. Of course, if you want to be more exact, you can be more exact. Again, cleaning up. If the blur goes over the edges of the eyes, and I'll just turn these off so we can see, you might want to consider adding in, once again, a layer mask, and then just cleaning up in the layer mask, clean away any of those unwanted blurred colours that may have crossed over into your image. Whoops, that was a slip. Let's put that back in. And that's looking not too bad at all. Okay, two little finishing touches to the whole thing. The area that we've cleaned up with this brow colour, I'm just going to copy the selection area of that by control clicking on the brow colour layer, and I'm going to take a copy from the original background layer by using the layer new layer via copy, or Control J or Command J for you Mac folk. By putting this down here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to smooth the skin just a little bit. Now you probably know there's a lot of different skin smoothing techniques, but I'm in a hurry here, so I'm just going to do this as quick as I can. I'll just use the Gaussian blur for this, and I'm going to only blur it just a little bit so it's nice and smooth, like so. Yes, I know it looks hideously fake, but just bear with me a second. And then dial the opacity right down to 0, and then just increase it a little bit, because what you're trying to do here is you're smoothing it just a touch. You're keeping the original details there as much as you can, but still smoothing it with the eye makeup. Okay, I'm happy with that. And that looks pretty good. Last thing that we need to do is I want to actually get a little bit of a shadow over here just to accentuate that colour a bit. Again, I need to have a new layer. This mode is going to be set to multiply. I'm going to call this shadow. And I just need a dab with my brush, a little dab of black. Just a little dab of black here. That's all. And once again, you guessed it, back to filter blur, Gaussian blur. And this time we really ramp this up, blow it out. Even more, even more. You'll have to judge this at the time you're doing it, but that looks pretty good to me. I'll say okay. And that's with it. and that's without the shadow. That gives it a little bit more punch. If you don't like it, again, use the opacity control. You can dial it in very exactly to the amount of shadow you want. Okay, there is our makeup job completed. I'll have the eyelash tutorial, is probably the next place that you'd like to visit to complete the image. See you over there.